You're listening to Faith for Normal People, the only other God-ordained podcast on the internet.
I'm Pete Enns.
And I'm Jared Bias.
Hey folks, we've been working on our children's Bible for over a year, and it's a project we are extremely proud of. And guess what? It's finally here. God's Stories as Told by God's Children is out now and ready for you and your curious kids to read together.
Yes, it's informed by biblical scholarship, of course, with the Bible for Normal People. It's inclusive, deeply respectful of children's imagination and intelligence. God's Stories as Told by God's Children is the storybook Bible you'll wish you had when you were a kid.
And it contains stories from over 50 contributors, including biblical scholars, theologians, and practitioners representing diverse religious traditions, locations, and lived experiences, mirroring the many voices we find in the Bible.
God's Stories as Told by God's Children allows parents to introduce children to their own beliefs and traditions in conversation with the stories found inside the Bible. You can order your copy right now at thebiblefornormalpeople.com/God's Stories.
It's time to tell you about our April class, Jesus and the Culture Wars, the Gospels as Guides, taught by none other than Amy Jill Levine.
This live class will cover how stories told by and about Jesus help us ask the right questions about the issues fracturing society today, including healthcare, economics, ethnicity, slavery's legacy, and family values. By locating Jesus in the world of first century Jewish life, AJ will demonstrate how we can prevent the anti-Semitism that frequently accompanies Christian teaching and how Jesus offers nourishing guidance rather than pie-in-the-sky promises.
Join AJ Levine for the live class on April 24th from 8 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, followed by an extended Q&A session for members of our online community, the Society of Normal People.
Just head to www.thebiblefornormalpeople.com/culture wars to sign up. It's pay what you can until the class ends, and then it will cost $25 to access the recording.
Hi, listeners. Today on Faith for Normal People, we have a very special episode because this is the first episode hosted by two nerds in residence. I'm Dr. Anna Sieges-Beal.
And I'm Dr. Angela N. Parker. You have heard us on the podcast as co-hosts before alongside Pete or Jared. But today we are your hosts, and we are very excited to bring you this conversation intertwining themes of justice, faith, healthcare, and ethics with Dr. Wylin D. Wilson.
Wylin is Associate Professor of Theological Ethics at Duke Divinity School, where she teaches within the Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative. She's also currently Principal Investigator for the research project called Bioethics and Black Church, addressing racial inequalities and Black women's health in North Carolina. Dr. Wilson is the author of Economic Ethics and the Black Church and Womanist Bioethics, Social Justice, Spirituality, and Black Women's Health, which is the focus of our conversation today.
Don't forget to stay tuned at the end of the episode for Quiet Time, where Anna and I will reflect on what we learned and how the themes of this interview impact our own faith experiences.
With all that said, we hope you enjoy this conversation with Wylin D. Wilson.
What's significant about womanism is the goal. Its goal is the healing, the health, the liberation, the care and love and respect for all of humanity, right? So you just start in one place, you start in one particular experience, but the goal is for all of us to be whole.
Dr. Wilson, we are so happy to have you on the podcast today. And part of your work deals with bioethics. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us what is bioethics? That is not something that was covered in my seminary ethics class.
Yes. So I am just overjoyed to be here and be in conversation with the both of you. So bioethics actually is the study of ethical dilemmas, ethical questions that arise in health, science, and technology. And most people are really familiar with bioethics, although they may not have studied it, right? So it addresses questions like the beginning of life, having to do with the beginning of life. When does life really begin? When does the fetus become human, right? And then it deals with questions about end of life. So, what is the definition of death? Death used to be really simple before we had technologies that could prolong our lives, right? Before we had ventilators and all of that. So it deals with those kinds of issues of suffering, the your patient doctor relationship. So you're actually involved in bioethics in more ways than you probably think about just normally in life.
Interesting. So I noticed that you have a lot of background in agriculture. And so this is a little bit different than that. How was it that you got interested in bioethics?
Yeah. So bioethics, it's very interesting because I will say I was really dealing with bioethics even before I even knew what it was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it all started way back when, when I was a young person. So this is also the impetus for my book. Like this is how my book came about, right? It contributes to this. So when I was born, I was born actually about 10 years after the desegregation of hospitals. Now, I know we talk about the desegregation of schools and restaurants and whatnot, right? And we rarely probably talk about the desegregation of hospitals in the U.S. And so hospitals were desegregated in about 1963, 1964, right? And so because I was born, not too long after that, I actually grew up hearing stories. I call them horror stories, right? Stories from family members, but also from church members. I went to an African American church, and it was a rural church, right? So that's a whole nother dynamic. So church members' stories and other folk just in the broader Black community, stories about their engagement, their interaction in the healthcare system. It was really unfortunate because here they were, you know, in the healthcare system. And this was an institution that was very much focused on cure, right? But where care was lacking for these individuals because of the what I call deadly intersection of race and health,
Mm.
right? A lot of these stories where individuals felt unheard, uncared for, unseen, right?
Mm.
And so those stories are part of what really helped me to understand the significance of, the field of healthcare in general. And then I later in life, when I got older and I was working in the rural Alabama Black Belt, in the heart of the Alabama Black Belt in Tuskegee, Alabama, and it was in a rural community. And so that, I mean, let me tell you, that solidified it for me because looking at the issue of rural health in this nation it's eye-opening for us because if you look at, there have been so many rural hospitals that have closed, right? There's been actually over 130 rural hospitals have closed from about 2010 to about 2020, 2021. And I know that sounds like a long period of time, but that's a lot of hospital closings. And almost 20 of those closings happened in 2020 alone, right?
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. At the time when we really, right? I
We
mean, can you imagine?
needed them.
We needed
Oh my
them. And
gosh.
so I'm just looking at the fact that, many women in rural areas, they have to travel an hour or more, right? To deliver a baby. When the hospital budget gets tight, though, the first ward to go is usually obstetrical ward.
No way.
Okay. Yeah.
Wow.
And of course the maternal mortality rate in rural areas, no matter if you're Black, white, Latina, whatever, the maternal mortality rate is higher in rural areas. So kind of, the culmination of these things really helped me to understand how significant bioethics is, right, for our lives.
So as I'm noticing your beautiful book in the background with the purple hue, and the beginning part is Womanist bioethics. One section of your book actually talks about how womanism is both theory and praxis, or so I think about it as theory and bodily almost.
Mm.
So I think my question for you is, first of all, can you explain womanism for our audience? But also, when did you realize you had to write womanist bioethics? And when did you kind of realize that you were womanist as well?
Womanism, like you said, it's theory and it's practice, right? And in my book, I really deal with womanist theology because that's foundational to womanist bioethics. And womanist theology, actually, what it is it is a response to mainstream American theology, which left out, unfortunately, um, a lot of perspectives of marginalized and minoritized populations. So, so what womanism does is, womanist theology is, it allows us expand to expand our conversation, to include diverse perspectives of individuals who have historically been left out of the conversation that's been going on in mainstream theology. And theology, of course, in America, our Western theology has left out voices of African Americans in general. And so you have Black liberation theology to come about because of that. But Black liberation theology left out the experience of Black women. So womanism is also a response to that, and a response to feminist theology, which left out minoritized in its earliest stages, left out the perspectives of minoritized women of color. So you asked also, um, why is it that we need womanist bioethics, right? And that's because, just like with theology, unfortunately, bioethics as a field, it also left out the perspectives and experiences of minoritized individuals. Bioethics has been done particularly from and historically from European and European American male perspective. And so, um, when I always say I came to bioethics through the rural Southern, Alabama Black Belt, right? And so coming to bioethics in a situation where I was always confronting, health disparities, food insecurity, economically depressed communities, right, and all that. So for me, bioethics, it had to deal with these issues, right? It had to center vulnerable populations, because that's what's so significant about womanist bioethics, is that it really does center vulnerable populations, and it has as its starting point one particular experience, right? The experience of Black and women of color. That's only the starting point. But what's significant about womanism is the goal. Its goal is the healing, the health, the healing, the liberation, the care and love and respect for all of humanity, right? So you just start in one place, you start in one particular experience, but the goal is for all of us to be whole, to be healed.
I wonder, just as you came to bioethics, I wonder how you came to womanism.
So when I was in seminary, I went to the Interdenominational Theological Seminary in Atlanta, Georgia, and that's where Dr. Jacqueline Grant was the professor of systematic theology. And so Dr. Grant was actually, she's one of the mothers of womanist theology, right? And so she and two other women, Katie Cannon, Dolores Williams, they were students of James Cone when they, were in graduate school. And so she really, of course, she and Cannon and Williams, they really shaped what womanism looked like in theological studies, because the actual term womanist was coined by Alice Walker, right? Cannon, Jacqueline Grant, and Dolores Williams, they really helped to kind of operationalize it, right? Like put hands and feet on it for us within womanist theology, which is within religious and theological studies. And so I was a student of hers, and I worked in her office, the Office of Black Women in Church and Society. And you know how it is when you're young, like when you're a kid, you don't really understand a lot of the important things that are happening around you, right? So you can't really appreciate it. So I just thought she was great. I was like, oh, she's wonderful. She's so brilliant, whatever. But I did not really appreciate that. Oh my goodness,
I'm like, what?
this woman. Now I really appreciate it. But yeah, so when I was a student, I was out there, I was working in her office, and I was reading these texts. I didn't know what womanism was, right? Even though I was a daughter of the Black church, right? Grew up in the Black church, but I had not heard of womanist theology. So I was introduced to it when I got to seminary, and it was kind of uncomfortable, right? It was really uncomfortable at first because I grew up in a rural Black Baptist church in the South, and so I had not even seen a woman preacher. Okay, before I got to seminary, like I seen women evangelists. Like we would allow people to be evangelists. But like a woman leading a church or up in that pulpit, she could preach from the podium on the floor, but in the so I got there and I was like, you're trying on something. It's like this is a little uncomfortable, a little itchy, like I was like, oh, this is not comfortable. So womanism at first for me, when I first tried it on, I was like, I don't know if this fits. But a funny thing about seeing and hearing and learning about other women's experience, other people's experience in general, right? That's why I love books and I love writing, because what books allow us to do, they allow us to enter other people's world and their experiences, but at a safe distance, right? At a really safe distance. And so when as I started reading and just hearing the stories of other women, and how they were treated and mistreated because they were women in the church, not allowed to have certain opportunities in the church in terms of leadership and whatnot, I really began to kind of think about, wow, wait a minute. Like it just really helped me to think through, well, yeah, wait a minute, is this right? And I love the Black church. I love the tradition that I came out of and grew out of. I still love it with all my heart, right? But it doesn't mean I cannot critique it. Right? You know what I'm saying? It doesn't mean that I cannot, because eyes of love, they are not eyes that don't see the flaws, right? They are eyes that see the flaws and can still hold that beloved so dearly in their heart, right? And so I still have that love for the church and what it has done, its amazing legacy of care, all of that. But I am very clear about how we have to hold the church accountable for what it has done and left undone, right? And with respect to women, and other vulnerable populations. So yeah, we gotta hold our institutions accountable.
if I can take a point of privilege, because I know Anna's going to come up with a question about faith and politics, but we're focused on Black church right now. And you engage the work of the Black church and you think about the Black church and you hold the Black church accountable. And you look at the Black church and you've opened up with thinking about racism and health. And I'm wondering, knowing that a lot of our listeners are probably more white and white adjacent, are members of more white church communities, how would you think about this conversation that for those of us who have grown up in Black church, how would you think about this conversation as transferable for our listeners who are in more white church spaces?
Yes, yes. So I think it's transferable in the sense of the Black church is a product of the church broadly in American society, right? So the Black church was not something that Black people set out to actually establish. It came about under unfortunate circumstances, right? It was literally forced into existence because of racial discrimination. Because unfortunately, the color line in our nation, it went all the way through, even into religion, right? So the racial segregation, the racism, unfortunately, is even it was even in the church, right, from the very beginning. And so the Black church literally came into being because, and there's a story about, Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, who started, the AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church. That kind of came from under their leadership. But yeah, they were pulled from their knees at the altar while praying in a white church. And what I am glad that they did do, I'm glad that they did not stay. I'm glad that they walked out in protest and said, we will not suffer inhumanity and blows against our dignity, because I think that was important, right? You should not stay and suffer abuse, right? And so unfortunately, the Black church came about because it was forced into existence because of racial discrimination. But yeah, so I think that churches in general, we all can look at like the culture of the church in general. The church has struggled when it has come to issues of gender, right? So it's not just the Black church that really suffers from, I call it this ailment of bad theology when it comes to issues of gender, how women are viewed, how women are treated, historically, right? That's also that is an issue that is pervasive, throughout churches, white, Black, oh my gosh, the Latin American church, Asian American churches. So this is something that we will find across the board. And so I usually, I look at the significance, and that's one of the things that's really important about my book. And I try to show that the significance of this text is I'm pinpointing one experience, a particular experience, right? Giving you a window into this particular experience. But a lot of the experience and the struggles of Black women are very much related to other women's experiences, right? And so having a window into our experience really and truly is really powerful, and it can speak to the broader experience, of women in our nation as well. So it's not a disconnect whatsoever.
I want to circle back to something that you said. You said that womanist bioethics begins with a particular lived experience of embodied people, right? And it says it out loud. It says, and this is about Black women. And the flip side of that, the thing that you're kind of coming up against is bioethics had previously been about the white experience, but we didn't say it out loud. And so I just think that it's so interesting that starting with the lived experience of Black women, you point to the flourishing of all people, right? Like that's the end goal. But when we start with and we don't say out loud, oh, this is about bioethics for white people, we never get to the flourishing of all people. And we don't say out loud that this is about white people. And so I wonder if you could say just a couple of words about why you think womanist bioethics is so uniquely placed to really address that issue of the flourishing of all people. Like, why is this such a good place to start?
Yes. Excellent question. And I would say the reason why is because, well, one of the reasons why is because in order for us to get an adequate understanding of what justice means in human relations, it requires that we start with the needs of those who are most vulnerable among us, right? Yeah. And it's by listening to those who are vulnerable, we can get a fuller sense of what concepts such as neighbor love, respect, and dignity, right? We get a fuller sense of what these concepts mean. And if not a fuller sense, we can at least get kind of a nuanced sense of what these concepts mean, right?
Right.
And so my book actually demonstrates that in order to prioritize the perspective of vulnerable folk for the sake of the common good, it does not devalue the gifts of those who are not vulnerable.
Right.
But what it does, it acknowledges the necessity of the gift of solidarity.
Say more about
and
that.
That's what I want people to really, get from my text. The necessity of this gift of solidarity. And now listen, when I say solidarity, I don't mean some like this superficial kind of stuff, right?
You don't mean the kumbaya.
Let's all hold hands and talk about just getting along. No. I really and truly mean, because one of the things I talk about in the book, right, that I say that womanist bioethics is about being and doing, right? Like, what kind of person do I want to be? How do I want to show up in this world? When I get up every morning, I do think about, like, how do I want to show up, especially how do I want to show up to work today, right? And one of the things that has really been a real blessing for me. Oh my gosh. So I started this, I don't know, a while ago. I usually try to have each semester, I try to start with a touch point, some touch point, like a scripture, a poem, anything, whatever, something that's just gonna keep me going, right? Give me encouragement. And so I've been doing that. Now, over a year ago, I decided, this semester, I want to use the love, what people call the love chapter, right? First Corinthians 13, right? Love is patient, love is kind, all that, yeah? And so I decided, that's going to be my touchstone for this semester. Y'all, it got so good. So each day I would read that, that chapter. Each day, well, okay, I may have missed a couple of days because let's be honest, nobody's perfect. Hey, but I read almost every day of the semester. I would get up and I meditate on that, right? And listen, that got so good to me that I've now been doing it. It's like over a year now. because I realized, I was like, this is exactly how I want to show up in the world. That's how I want to show up. Patient, kind. Love does not dishonor others. Oh my gosh, that right there. If we all just like stayed in that space of not dishonoring others, that is life-changing in and of itself, right? so this notion of being, what kind of person do I want to be? How do I
Yes.
want to be in this world?
Mm.
I think is really important, and just as important as doing, because we're in a culture that we're so
Yeah.
obsessed with doing. Like, what can we do? How,
Yes.
what we can do is figure out how to be. you know?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I love that so much because you say, how do I want to show up in the world?
Mhm.
How do I want to be? And it's so holistic. And but in my mind, when I hear that you're dealing with bioethics, I'm like, oh, that's the nitty gritty stuff. But you're like, no, it's much bigger than
No,
that.
it's more.
And I love that. I also I kept thinking as you were talking about why womanist bioethics is the best place to start. I was like, man, Dr. Wilson, that's the opposite of trickle down bioethics. You know, we're starting with the most vulnerable, and
With the
what a
right.
wonderful way to do it.
Yeah. So it flows up. But I
Mhm.
also note that you are dealing with issues of the most vulnerable, and you're going from the particular then into the universal, if we would use universal language. But all throughout your conversation and your beautiful laughter as well, your personality, faith is infused in all of it. And I'm can you talk about how your faith has been infused in all of this and what that means to you?
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. Yes. Faith is the cornerstone. And that's one of the reasons why womanist theology and womanist theory really was really resonated with me, right?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
because faith really is faith slash spirituality, right? Some people are more
Mhm.
comfortable with spirituality. So I'm like, okay. But yeah, that is it's a cornerstone, right? Um, to it. And for me, I look at the fact that when we look at things like justice, justice particularly from a faith perspective, and in my particular experience from, from a Christian faith perspective, justice goes beyond just the allocation of resources, right? Whether you have enough or I have enough, right? And whether we're sharing things equally. It goes beyond that to the demands. It's about the fidelity to the demands of a relationship,
Mm.
you know? And so,
Wow.
right, and so what it means then, it's about how faithful are we to the demands of our relationship with one another, because we have claims on one another, right? As fellow citizens, but not only as fellow citizens, but as human beings, because we have
Mhm.
people that come into our communities who they may not be citizens, or they may not quote have belong there in the sense that some people want to talk about people belonging in a place,
Mhm.
but as a human being, as a child of God who deserves love and care and respect, there
Yes.
are the demands of a relationship,
Mm.
our relationship to one another. And I want to always honor that, right? And our relationship to creation, the demands of the relationship to creation, right? How faithful am I to the relationship to water,
Mhm.
to, plants,
Mm.
trees, to parks? Like, we don't think about, we kind of, we need to think about being in relationship with all of creation. And are we faithful to the demands of those relations? And of course, faithful to the relationship to divine mystery, right? So
Mm.
so yeah, so that to me, I think is so significant.
I wonder, as you put all of that together and you've talked to us about your faith and just even this beautiful language of solidarity and relationship. What made you have to write Womanist bioethics?
As I was actually working with churches in Alabama, in in the rural South. I mean, there is so much history there, right? So I'm confronting so much history. Just as I was walking around, I was working at Tuskegee University. I was on faculty there in the College of Agriculture, but also at the Bioethics Center there, right? And so I'm walking around on that campus, and I noticed, I always, when I first got there, when I first started working, I noticed some of the brick on some of the buildings looked so different. It was beautiful, but it just looked really different than other brick buildings. And so I asked a colleague, I was like, hey, what's up with these buildings that have this different kind of brick? It's really lovely, but the difference is striking. They said, oh, those are the original brick buildings that were built by formerly enslaved Africans. I was like, shut up. So it was just amazing. It is something to walk every day and look at something that was made by the hands of folk who just came out of enslavement in this nation, right? Like that put me in a whole different mindset of possibility.
Yes.
But then it also put me in the mindset of just that history. It kept the history ever before me. And then on campus, of course, is the grave of George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington, two amazing historical figures, not just at Tuskegee and at Tuskegee University, but just in our nation's history, right?
100.
And so I would sometimes just walk among their graves because that history is profound. And so as I also kept digging into the history, I started reading the narratives of enslaved African women who were breeders, and you know, I have some of those stories in the book, and yeah, looking at that history, looking at the history of the hospital there, that was in Alabama, because it was a hospital that served African Americans and poor whites, because poor whites were locked out of mainstream medical institutions as well, and foreigners, like they were. I mean, discrimination was serious, right? That segregation was really serious, and so a lot of vulnerable populations were locked out of our public facilities, and so really just digging into that history of how people were treated in our healthcare institutions and whatnot. That is what further pushed me to write, right? Because I think these stories are really powerful, because one of the reasons why I have stories in the book, various stories, is because the lives of African American women actually testify not just to the historical state of healthcare institutions, but the current state of healthcare, right? And they don't just testify to it, but they also critique it and interpret it, right? So the lives of minoritized women do a lot of work for us, right? And so sharing these stories is really, really important, because stories, not only do they help create empathy, but they help us to see where, there is a lot of commonality between between the different experiences that we have, right? And so they help us see where we're connected, where our struggles connect. They help us to see how we are a part, like we're a part of one another's story. We have a hand in the health of each other. We all have a hand in it. And stories are just absolutely healing, right?
Yes.
Some stories can undo us, right? The stories that perpetuate the lies that we are all so different, and those people over there are so different, and they they don't deserve to be among us, right? They're inhuman in some way. Like those lies, if stories based on lies like that, those are the stories that undo us.
Undo us.
Right? But stories that are based in truth, those stories heal us.
Heal us and change us and help change the narratives that we tell ourselves too. You are a masterful storyteller in this work. So I wonder which story changed you personally.
Gosh, that story of Adeline holding her baby, and she's on the auction block. She's an enslaved woman on the auction block. And just to that story allowed me to really understand how dehumanizing it was to be considered less than human, but also just a breeder, like a woman who was just, like a cat, like, like any other, chattel, right? She was going to just breed children. But that story, it struck me so, because I think to be honest with you, when you think about slavery in the US, a lot of times we think about folks just working out in fields, right? But we think of manual labor in that sense, but we don't think of the added laboring that the women, that African women did, by having to have to breed more slaves and more enslaved persons, because slavery was officially outlawed in 1808. And so the transatlantic slave trade was outlawed, right? So then that meant that the slavocracy that kept going it needed breeders.
It needed breeders. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Adeline's story, I mean, that story, and I'm going to tell you, just digging into the history, I did a lot of crying. I did, because I'm the kind of person that I don't believe in crying in public. I don't like crying in public, but I do believe in releasing emotions. Like, we shouldn't hold in emotions. And so reading our history, the painful parts of our history, I think it's important. Shed those tears, let it out. I don't think we should be ashamed of our history. I don't think we should feel guilty about our history. Like whenever I teach in my courses, I tell my students, history is not to shame you. It's not to guilt you. History, it's a part of what makes us who we are. The good, the bad, the ugly, right? It's just like a family. Y'all know in y'all family.
Yes.
Y'all know that family history that nobody ever talks about. Everybody looking sideways if somebody brings it up or mentions something related to y'all, like, we're not supposed to talk about that, right? Like, it's just like a family. Our nation is like a family. Yes, we have stuff that nobody wants to talk about, nobody wants to deal with. But the problem is, as long as we, keep burying it or try to take it out of the public conversation and take it out of the public square, then we can never heal.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
We will always, always, always have this unresolved racial past that is undealt with. And so I'm praying that my book is doing healing work as well. Yeah, because this book, I kid you not, it's a labor of love. It's truly a gift that comes out of love. That's when people buy that. I pray that people feel that and know that.
Well, and the way that you tell the stories, they point to those deep fractures, like Adeline's story, the way that fidelity of demands of relationships was not being met, right? And so, and telling that story, like you said, help shed light on our present. Why are those fractures still here? They go back a long way. And so, yeah, so important. Such a good work. I'm so excited about it.
Thank you.
So excited and so thankful for the work that you've done and the time that you've taken to have this conversation with us on faith and solidarity, relationships, womanist bioethics, and why it is so important in present conversations today. Dr. Wilson, you are a pleasure, and we just thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for just for allowing me to just be a part of such a lovely conversation. You two are just phenomenal women, and I appreciate you both. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Any final words you would offer to our Faith for Normal People listeners?
Yeah. My final words are, if you don't do anything else, please, on a daily basis, wake up and lean hard into care for one another. Lean hard into connecting with folks, and especially connecting with folks who may seem really different than you. There's an exercise that I got this from an amazing rabbi. She said that one of the things that she was like to do is when she sees someone who she really disagrees with on a political level, or a social level, someone who she's is totally opposite of herself. She likes to say to herself, "We are the same. We are the same." And let me tell you something. So I was thinking, I was like, oh, that's nothing. But then I practiced it as I ran into folk who I know are just on opposite ends of where I stand, on issues about love and justice and all that. And I was trying to say to myself, we are the same. And I'm like, no, we're not. Because look, they don't. And then I'm like, no, but we are the same. So I'm telling you, it's like a tug of war, right? So I just want to challenge your listeners to really push back on all of the division and the fear, all that is dividing us. Push back on all the, kind of the internal scripts that we have in our minds when we see people, right? We don't even think about when we see people. We got a whole narrative that we have made up about that person. We don't know anything about this person. So I just challenge people to really push back on those narratives. Try saying we are the same. Because it is hard.
We have a task and we have homework.
That's right. We sure do. Dr. Wilson, thank you so much for being with us. This has been such a rich conversation. And I mean, I just think that we should kick Pete and Jared off the pod much more frequently because this has been great and you have been such a delight.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now it's time for Quiet Time
with Anna and Angela. Wow, that was such a great conversation with Dr. Wilson. I think I've come away with this idea that I really need to be a better person with trying to think about the sameness that I can try to find with other people. I really do believe I've come away with homework on how I can really look at other people and note the sameness that I can at least find with people that I may perceive myself to be very different from. I think that's my first major takeaway as I ponder this conversation, this beautiful and rich conversation that we just had with Dr. Wilson.
That homework is homework I do not want to do, but I think it'll be so good for me. So yeah, no, I hear you.
Good. Yeah, and it will be hard, but it's going to be important work. And also just thinking about how she infused faith in so much of everything that she did. Going from the particularity of womanism and then thinking about how it has conversations to the universal, how it actually flows from the bottom up, so to speak, and what that means for everybody. I think that's a beautiful way to think about how it's not trickle down,
Right,
as
right,
we've been hearing a lot lately, you
right.
know?
Well, and Angela, you have you have been privy to a lot of my white lady epiphanies, and I
Which is
definitely
why I wanted to do this with you.
oh my gosh, I was full of them tonight. But one of the ones that when I was reading through her book, I kept thinking, why womanist? Why do we start with Black women? You know when you know that you're wrong, but you're not sure how yet? And so it took coming to this podcast for me to really figure that out, that like if we start with the most vulnerable, everybody wins, you know? Um I that just hadn't really occurred to me when I was prepping for this interview, and I love it when we have these faith-filled conversations that help illumine my blind spots, because that's what community does, you know? And I feel like that's what she kept calling us back to again and again, our responsibility to one another. The more we can engage in that kind of deep community and deep listening to the vulnerable, the better we're going to be for it. The more we're going to recognize our responsibility to one another.
She held up solidarity, the gift of solidarity, and the fidelity to the demands of a relationship. And one thing about womanism is the idea or the tenet of traditional communalism.
Mhm.
That means that we don't, or as for myself, as another womanist, I don't seek liberation just for myself.
Mm,
Part of my faith journey is to be and try to find liberation for all people.
mhm,
It's not supposed to be a selfish liberation.
right.
It's supposed to be a liberation where we are not doing fake kumbaya, but we're actually doing that gift of solidarity. So I'm not supposed to get upset with you if you say, oh, why start here? I'm supposed to be like, no, let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
Let's sit down and just actually be honest about our feelings, our emotions, and even our starting points. And that's where we actually can look at one another and say, okay, what's the sameness that we have?
Right. Right.
And that's, we actually do look at each other with hands open instead of clenched fists.
Oh, I
And
love
I
that.
think that's what I'm also taking from this, because that's the I really do, some of us still actually do believe in a Jesus who walked this earth and looked at people with some kind of compassion and some kind of empathy. And so starting with the least of these actually should open up larger faith pathways, I guess,
Yeah.
for better relationships, for those fidelity to the demands of a relationship among humanity. I think one thing I've been wrestling with is the idea of faith being just a faith to God. And it
Yeah.
seems like the a lot of the language of faith has been, oh, I have faith in God, I have faith in Jesus. But we've not had a good enough conversation about what our faith towards one another looks like. And I think that's what this conversation has really opened up. How can we really have a faith in one another and begin to heal that? And I think
Mm.
when I ponder this conversation as well, how we actually had a divided church, because we've had a divided, segregated church, because we haven't had that faith in one another as a church. Just the passing comment of Richard Allen and the beginning of the AME church
Right.
and the church beginning in segregation because we couldn't worship together. The Black worshipers had to worship in the balcony.
Yeah.
And because we decided, no, we're not going to worship in the balcony anymore. We're going to start our own churches because we don't believe in a segregated heaven. So why should we have a segregated church? And that's how Black church began, out of that necessity. And that's the beginning of why we don't have that fidelity to the demands of a relationship, a faithful relationship with one another as well.
I loved when she pointed that out, that the Black church didn't start because Black people were like, you know what we should do? Have our own church. But and the sad thing is that I had never thought about that before. Like, just hadn't even would have known it if I'd taken a breath and stopped to think about it, that segregation wasn't Black people's idea. I've often heard this quote that, at least in the United States, Sunday mornings are the most segregated time of the week, right? And that is just shocking. It's always kind of jarring to hear, because you're like, oh no, we should be more united. But very often, and I even find this within myself, to do desegregation on Sunday morning might mean people like me walking into a church experience where my Black brothers and sisters worship and have me saying, well, you're doing it wrong. Like, we're going to come and worship with you, but you need to be more like us, you know? And yeah, I think about that a lot. Like, I think about my kids, and you know how she was talking about like the more vulnerable ones and like how we need to pay attention to that. So I've got one kid that's more vulnerable than the other one. And I just think about my daughter, who is not vulnerable, going into my son's space, like his room, and I could just see her being like, "Oh, you're doing it wrong. You need to do this more like me." And how, yeah, I feel that impulse like within myself. So having a desegregated Sunday morning sounds great, but I wonder if white people like me would get in the way of that actually happening.
And we can take that into so many different areas. We also had a conversation in this moment about gender issues.
Mm-hmm.
Because think about churches that don't want to ordain women. We have other churches who look at those churches that do ordain women and they're saying, you're doing it wrong. You should not be doing that.
Oh, that is so good. I hadn't even thought of that.
Right?
Dang.
It's the same power dynamic. For me, it always comes back to the power dynamic about how people are practicing their faith. And someone is always trying to tell someone else how to practice their faith. Is it possible to live in a world where you are actually okay with people practicing their faith in the ways that they want to practice their faith? And you actually have to be okay with it. And they may not practice their faith the way you practice your faith. I often ask students to go to different churches just to be in different spaces for a little bit. It may not be what you're used to, but it's okay to see a high liturgical space where there's incense around, just to have that experience.
Yeah.
Or to go to a church that's more extemporaneous, or to go to a church that's more contemplative.
Right.
Different people worship differently. They practice their faith differently. Can we live in a world where all of these different iterations of faith are actually okay? We're not all supposed to be the same, but we can recognize that there are some similarities and still live in our differences.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I love the idea of like, so one of the things that I love about this book and about womanism in general is that it starts with the lived experience of Black women, right? Like, you just take that as a starting point. And the way that I've been trained is to don't take your lived experience as a starting point. You need to go to that empirical reality that is beyond the self. That sounded so, I don't know. That sounded so much like Jared. Anyway, no, but I love that idea because so much of what I do does not focus on who I am and where I am and my embodied self and how I want to show up in the world and how I want to build relationship. And I just think that we all have so much to learn from womanism because it centers a real story rather than pretending that we don't all
Right.
have real stories, because
Exactly.
we do. And so,
Exactly.
yeah, I think that's so rich, and that's something that I'm going to keep on wrestling with, and coming back to again and again.
Well, I really did appreciate having this conversation with you because I know it's a wrestling. And I think for me, it's very natural to come from my lived experience because as a womanist, finally, when I got into my PhD program, that's how I was trained.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad you were able to do this with me.
Me too. I had so much fun.
I had so much fun too.
Well, thanks to everyone who supports the show. If you want to support what we do, there are 3 ways you can do it. 1, if you just want to give a little money, go to thebiblefornormalpeople.com/give.
And if you want to support us and want an all-access pass to our classes, ad-free live stream of the podcast, and a thoughtful community of people asking tough questions about the Bible and faith, you can become a member of our online community, the Society of Normal People, at thebiblefornormalpeople.com/join.
And lastly, it goes a long way if you just wanted to rate the podcast, leave a review, and tell others about our show. In addition, you can let us know what you thought about the episode by emailing us at info@thebiblefornormalpeople.com.
You've just made it through another episode of Faith for Normal People. Don't forget you can catch our other show, The Bible for Normal People, in the same feed wherever you get your podcasts. This episode was brought to you by the Bible for Normal People team. Brittany Hodge, Stephen Henning, Joel Limbowen, Savannah Locke, Melissa Yando, Tessa Stoltz, Danny Wong, Lauren O'Connell, and Naomi Gonzalez.